All right, so thanks so much again for doing this. First off, tell me a little bit about DD Ally PAC and how did it get started?
Oh my gosh. Well, for folks tuning in, you can go to www.DDALLYPAC.com to look at the website because that'll answer a lot of the questions that I will unpack a little bit further now, though. So PAC, the DD Ally PAC, in a lot of ways, is a culmination of 20 years of policy and legal experience in our state that has been married with the personal lived experience of being a mom to two kids with developmental disabilities and the twin sister who grew up alongside a sibling with developmental disabilities. And I've been so excited to be on your show before. So I know that I've said this before, but I'm really passionate about making sure that people who are impacted by the issues that affect them have the lion's share of the say in the decisions that get made about them. So recently, the bill that was passed this last year, the Nothing About Us Without Us bill, that's actually a really that's a motto that was born out of the civil rights movement and out of specifically the disability justice movement many years ago. That's not a new thing. And so trying to thread that needle a little bit more, and coming into this space over 10 years ago, when my son was born, I just started looking around and seeing what was missing, and just noticing that a lot of the organizations that exist today are really beleaguered with the scarcity of the system, right? We don't invest in humans, and that's a chronic underfunding of making sure that humans can live well. And so for me, this is about getting another lever of power to humans, the humans who have to interact and interface with a really broken human services system, right? And a service system that's also got a lot of roots in ableism and racism. And so I was really frustrated by the constant barriers that I have found of the funding streams following people is how I want it to be. But right now I see people going after funding streams, if that makes sense. So for example, if something gets funded, there's not a lot of questioning or accountability about whether or not that is having the intended outcome to actually help people. There's not a lot of reflection about whether or not if somebody's using a service, if they're not using a service, should we shift that money elsewhere? Should we build in more accountability to the service to ensure that it's having the intended outcome? So we're not doing a lot of accountability about and measuring whether or not the services that are out there in our systems are actually benefiting people. And in fact, we have a lot of data points to say that they're not. And I feel like those data points get ignored. And so so that's the mechanics of it. And then just, then there's the politics of it. This is a political action committee. And so all that means is that there's a group of people that are going to come together who are impacted by developmental disabilities in some way, that either they themselves have a developmental disability or they're caring for a loved one with a developmental disability, whether or not they are eligible for a service. They're invited to come together and be a part of the endorsement calls to decide, whether a candidate who has responded to a questionnaire should be endorsed. And that's the DD Ally PAC. And so that's what that is. And again, it was just born out of my seeing a lack of accountability and attention to the DD community, people with developmental disabilities and their families overall. And in fact, I feel a lot of frustration because I do think it's easy to ignore and minimize the needs of this community for a lot of reasons. And so again, this is just another way to try and to answer that call, basically.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, what sorts of things do you do at DD Ally PAC? I know it's like mostly like a political action committee, but like if I were to like show up to one of these meetings, what would I sort of expect?
Well, it's a great question. So this is a volunteer thing. This is me and my esteemed colleague Adana Protonentis, who is a DEI expert in our state, who does she's one of the foremost thought leaders in our state, especially when it comes to looking at intersectionality of talking about racism and ableism and othering and belonging. And so she's with Kindred Leaders, and she's my co-conspirator in this. And so we're so lucky to have her in Washington State. And so we are two very busy parents to kids with developmental disabilities. And so this isn't like a well-oiled, well-funded machine. I specifically didn't want that because I think there's already enough, honestly, organizations in our ecosystem. And so my hope is that this is just another way that people can get out and make a difference. So basically, if you come to an endorsement call, there's only going to be 2 or 3, but it's really a ton of work that we're asking people to do, because what we did was send out candidate questionnaires. We sent out questionnaires. So there's just and you can go on the PAC website and look, actually, and I hope you do, at the questionnaires. Sorry. The questions that we're asking candidates, it's all on the website. So I'm trying to be as transparent as possible, and just ask people before they come to the candidate call, that they read the answers that candidates have submitted. So what that looks like is we're going to have a call in July, sorry, to explain what a PAC is, and I hope you come. And it's for people, it really is for people, and I'm not going to, be a gatekeeper or anything, but it's for impacted people, right? Because I think that there's already really strong, robust representation for organizations in Olympia, but I want to get that same sort of robust representation to people, impacted people and their families. So this is really an effort to do that. So you can expect that we're going to have a conversation about what a PAC is, what the role is, what the hope is, what the outcomes that I hope for the PAC are. And then make sure that everybody understands that there's actually going to be a fair bit of reading that needs to happen, and that you need to look at either to read it yourself or to have a support person read it or a screen reader of some sort to ensure that you're reading the answers to the candidate questionnaires. So the questionnaires are designed and intended to educate candidates for any office, really, about the some of the issues and perspectives that are impacting the developmental disability community. So, for example, on the website, I go through and unpack a lot of the terminology that gets used and talk about people first language, identity first language, why we eradicate euphemisms, and just really try in plain language some of the big topics that our community has grappled with. And I do that because I talk to a lot of legislators and candidates for office, and there's still just a lot of discomfort about talking to and about people with developmental disabilities. People really want to do the right thing. Nobody wants to offend or say the wrong thing. And so I think people really consider it a gift to know what language and what terminology to use and what not to use. So that's my main service, is honestly just trying to get a little bit more educational about the community in general, what it looks like as a caregiver, to support someone with a developmental disability, hopefully to give a ton of space for people with developmental disabilities themselves to say what's true for them and their experience of the world, and then for them to be able to weigh in on endorsement calls as well. So I do hope that you come to the endorsement calls after having read the questionnaires. I've got, I think, 17 submissions so far, which is really exciting. And then we can have a robust conversation about, depending on people's answers to those questionnaires, who we want to endorse, who we'd want to give money to, etc.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, what sort of stakeholders do you partner with closely? Because I know I saw on one invitation that you will be talking with a lot of Congress people, uh, Jamila Taylor and some other candidates running for office. So I'm wondering, just like in general, what sorts of stakeholders does DD Ally PAC rely on to sort of get the message out there to people?
Um, Well, I'm relying on impacted people to get the message out. And so asking people to share the website, if it's something that speaks to you, to share the website. People who can donate. But mainly, so the PAC itself is nonpartisan. And so I am really hopeful that we can partner with people of all political stripes, because I don't think that having a developmental disability or having a loved one with a developmental disability needs to be a partisan issue, right? We need people of all political stripes to work together and to see the benefit and the value of people with developmental disabilities, and consider the services and supports that are needed to be really necessary budget priorities. So this is mostly aimed at legislators who serve in Olympia. And so we've got 49 senators and 98 representatives. And, here in Olympia, we do send, folks back to Congress, and they are absolutely welcome to fill out the questionnaire. My guess is that they won't, but they certainly can. And the issues that I brought up on the questionnaire, at least this time around, were mostly aimed at a few of the state issues that are just really urgent and that really need to be addressed. That folks in Congress, I don't think a lot of this stuff is on their radar, to be honest with you. So as far as people that I'm relying on my networks and fellow parents and family members. I'm relying on my colleagues who are impacted with developmental disabilities themselves. Um, and I'm also, talking to my colleagues of color, folks with language access barriers, and asking them to share and to get involved and to come to the calls. I'm trying really hard to not ask people for a ton of free labor because I feel like our community already is asked for a ton of free labor. And so there's a tension there, right? I want to balance not having anybody feel left out, but also not asking people to come to things that aren't going to be really heavily consequential. So yeah, that's my answer. I hope to use the existing networks that we have, and not trying to exclude anyone, but just making sure that folks understand that this is really built for and about and by people with developmental disabilities and their primary caregivers, who are usually the parents who are supporting them at home. Not always, but that's the um, general gist of it.
Yeah, my next question is what's the impact that your PAC in particular has on the disability community? In other words, why does a PAC like this, why is it important compared to like other PACs that people see in the news ecosystem or political ecosystem?
Um, yeah, so how is it different? Well, first of all, I think that this pack is so I don't want this pack to just be Adrienne and Adana's pack. We're the co-chairs, but it can't just be two people, right? I really want to build the bench and raise the level of sophistication in our advocacy community. And so that requires people coming to the table and learning and understanding um, how the people in political office can greatly impact our lives for better or for worse. If you've got people in office who don't understand the importance of, you know, um, rates of, caregiver pay rates, or of making sure that kids aren't being segregated and isolated and restrained in schools. If we're electing people to office who don't have a ton of experience with these issues, which we are, they need to be educated, right? And so I don't see that education happening. There has to be kind of a carrot. And you know, uh, so it's best to get people a little bit more upstream before they start get into their political office or their career. Um, and so, there's folks who have been serving for a long time and have really, um, you know, hardened beliefs about things. And so we're not necessarily going to convince everyone, but I feel like this pack is very transparent. I haven't found actually any other pack websites, certainly not any pack websites that were unpacking really in a transparent, visible way for the community and for the ecosystem to digest. Um, the issues that they care about, right? A lot of the packs that I see are really secretive. They have millions of dollars. I do not have millions of dollars. Um, yet, although if Mackenzie Scott or somebody happens to be listening, I am ready to receive millions of dollars. um, but yeah, so I think for me, that those are the key things, that we aim to be really transparent, and really, really educational. And honestly, this is about trying to get the folks who are participating and sending in candidate questionnaires to think about the issues, and to think about people with developmental disabilities, not just in the policy and budget discussions that I ask, but one of the questions that I ask on the candidate questionnaire is, do you have a platform on your website for people with developmental disabilities and their families?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see a lot of other PACs don't need to ask that, because people just do that anyway, right? Candidates are just like, they're just going to follow the money, and so this is, again, just another way to try and get the issues a little bit more upstream in the candidates' campaign platforms. I would love to see candidates start saying, I got endorsed by the DD Ally PAC, and here's what that means. And so there's just another lever of accountability to people, right? To people with developmental disabilities. And that's who ultimately candidates, anyone in elected office should be accountable to. It's right. It's the humans that are the end users of this service, and who are most marginalized.
Mm-hmm. Because I feel like a lot of political campaigns, like you said, they're all about money. They're all about donations. They're all about, see, it's happening in our political ecosystem right now. It's just, but yours, I would assume it's different, and it focuses much more kind of structurally, kind of, it's different in a way.
It's super different. Yeah, I mean, I yeah, we aren't going to have millions of dollars, right, to so heavily influence the outcomes of these races. But that's okay, because at least for right now, we're starting small, and I do hope that it'll grow over time. And I think and hope it will, as people start to realize and understand that the questions that they're answering are directly tied to the outcomes of constituents in their communities. And so it really is up to us as constituents and legislators' communities to show up and say, were you endorsed by the DD Ally PAC? I care about this. The DD Ally PAC has a filtering system and an educational process that you need to go through to have a basic understanding to be a responsive public servant to our community. And so I hope people read the mission, vision, values statement on our website, because I do really feel like that does a pretty good job of encapsulating, what we hope to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. As like a final wrap up to this conversation, my question is, what can people take away from this thing? In other words, how does your particular ally pack in particular, how can that make a difference in people's lives, particularly those with developmental disabilities?
Yeah. What can people take away of this? Well, I'm really proud of I'm really proud of just the PAC website's a culmination of almost a year of work. And so I'm really proud of uh, the resource page. I hope people take away just a list of resources to get up to speed and stay current and up to date on the best brain science, the best practices with regard to how to really humanely support people with developmental disabilities, and also unpacking the intersectionality and the importance of addressing racism and ableism in the social services just in general. I really hope that people take away from that just a landing page of a place they can go that has really great neurodiverse affirming resources. You know, you asked before about stigma, you know, and before, when I think about stigma, I guess I think about normalizing. But we used to, in the last 20, 30 years, you know, especially in our state, we had this this bureaucratic ecosystem that really aimed to normalize people, meaning that it had the effect of erasing a person's disability identity and pretending that the person wasn't disabled. And you know, we've seen that not work, right? And so the popular thing was to have like a soup can label, and say we're not a label, you know, and that's true. And it's also true that people have support needs that are going unmet by the services and supports and educational systems in our state. And so we really have to do something about that with urgency. And I think part of that is, you know, eliminating the stigma around disability and really start talking about disability as a super normal part of human life and human variation. And there is a continuum of support needs, right? And we're all on the continuum. None of us is ever going to escape totally that continuum of support needs. And so my hope from this is that we start talking about developmental disabilities differently in our state. I really hope that this takes off and that other states, other advocates in other states want to replicate this, and that we start holding our local and statewide leaders accountable for providing really robust services and supports for people with developmental disabilities, because that will in turn help the families who support and care for and love people with developmental disabilities, you know, in their homes. Most people with developmental disabilities, whether they're a child or an adult, live in the home. So I do really try and focus on making space for impacted families as well. That's really critical to me too. So that's
Mm-hmm.
my hope. I hope to start out small this year, but really grow it and get some excitement, get some awareness, get people talking differently, get candidates just engaging with the verbiage and the terminology, and you know, eliminating euphemisms and getting people just more comfortable, including people with developmental disabilities in their campaigns, in their literature, thinking about accessibility on their campaign websites. That's it. I really want to infuse the political discussion in our states with more information about our needs and our causes. So thank you for
Mm-hmm.
having me on your podcast today. I'm really grateful because I think
My,
this will be super helpful.
my pleasure.